And living in Washington, D.C. and learning how to be resourceful, I figured out very quickly that event production and bringing people together makes change. So I knew from that point, fundraising and sales background was just really just the seed for what I do for a living. So now that you do your, then I'll talk about my story. Then you do your intro first.
Oh, switch to the other one.
Is it on?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So my name's Anita Fineday, and I also grew up in Louisville, Kentucky, and I also ended up in Minnesota. So that is quite a coincidence. I did not know that I had a sister until 2015 is when Peggy found me. So I grew up in Louisville, Kentucky, graduated from high school there, and decided it was a good place to be from, but but not a place that you wanted to stay. So yeah, so I've lived in Minnesota for the past 30 years, bounced around, went to school, and went to CU Law School in Boulder, and then went to the Kennedy School, and most of my professional life as an attorney, I've worked for tribes in Minnesota. So I'll turn it back to you.
So I was adopted from birth. I had wonderful parents who were unable to have any more children after I have an adoptive sister. And so they went through that process of waiting for me at birth. And I was told very early, you're special, and this is why you're special. And it took me a while to get it, but then I finally understood. And I remember growing up feeling like, yes, I'm loved, and yes, there's a foundation, but there's slightly something missing. And I'm not exactly sure what that is. And I was too young at the time to know, to have the tools to research and find out, how do I find the rest of my family? So really, I'm going to propel you all the way to when I was 3 years into my marriage. I've been married for 31 years. And we were considering starting a family. And I knew some stories about that my family told me regarding everybody involved in my adoption story. So I reached out to Dr. Peggy Jean Howard. She was the obstetrician that helped my parents locate my biological mother who needed to place a child, and that child was me. And when I asked her, I said, well, do I have any concerns about starting a family? She said, honey, in those days, we didn't have much. I'm sure you're going to be fine. Best of luck to you. And she was lovely about it, but she was very succinct and to the point. And she, in her own right, grew up in Appalachia, Kentucky, had very little education, but she got herself educated, got into medical school, graduated medical school, and made incredible strides for maternal fetal health. And so a great woman in her own right. So I reached out to the state of Kentucky in 1994, trying to petition to get my file open. What I didn't know is that Kentucky is a sealed state. And it was just, I'm relentless, as Anita might tell you. But finally, I got a letter describing non-identifying information of my birth family. What that is just descriptions of the birth parents, not really the circumstances in terms of why I was placed, but that adoption would be the best option and that their health was good. Okay, so that's all I knew. So I had obviously my daughter Eliza in 1998, and she has a younger sister named Margot, had her in 2002. And still there was this gnawing curiosity. When am I going to do this? When am I going to take this seriously? And it also harkened me back to questions that I would receive when I was a young lady. And I was raised Jewish. I'm very proud to be a Jew. It's an amazing way of life. Well, you don't look Jewish. Well, you're so tall. Your cheekbones are funny. I'm like, really? We're going to do this? Or you're so normal for being adopted. And I said, are you normal for saying that to me? You know, those kinds of things. And I thought maybe there's more to this. So I'm going to fast forward to early 2014. I had already reached out. I had been petitioning the state, and it took months and months and months. And you send in these forms, and I was petitioning a judge, and I was asked, why do I want to know this information? I'm like, well, because it's my life, but that wasn't good enough. So I wanted to communicate with family. I wanted to find out family history if I needed to know anything, even though I already had my children. And really and truly, I wanted to offer gratitude. What an incredible thing that my birth mother, Anita's mother, had to make that decision. So months and months and months go by, and I had gone to Children's Home Society while waiting for information from the state, maybe thinking maybe they could help me. Well, they started a search. They found my birth mother. They called her, they reached her, and she said she's glad that I'm well, but really nobody in the family knew, and she wasn't prepared to meet with me. So I said to my social worker, I said, so what happens now? She said, well, upon her demise, we will reach out to the next of kin. And I said, thank you very much. I'm relentless. I got to go find another way. A dear friend of mine is adopted. He's an incredible researcher. And I reached out to him. I said, what do I do with this information? This is just not good enough. And he said, you know what? I've got a private investigative firm downtown Minneapolis. I want you to reach out to them and they will help you. I did. And I had all this information and I dropped it off and I was assigned a private eye investigator. And 2 days later, he called me and said, I found her. And I said, so I didn't know that my birth mother was in Minnesota. I knew she was born in Minnesota, but I didn't know she was from Minnesota. So I said, where does she live? I'm thinking like Alaska or California. She lives in Brainerd. I said, no way. And so I'm trying to, take this all in and process it. And he said, why don't I just email you everything? Because I can tell you're quite upset. I said, I am. I said, I'm just, oh my gosh. So with that knowledge, I then reached back out to my friend who had referred me to the private investigator. And I said, Sam, they found her. And I'm just like, I can't even speak. I don't know what to do. And I did know there was an older child that was a girl, but I never knew that it was a girl. I knew many years before there was another child, but never knew age, nothing. So he said, wait a minute. I'm on the phone with him. He said, look at your Gmail. I think I found your half sister. I'm like, what? Because by now I've shared my birth mother's address and some other information. He was able to find photos of her, where she worked. I thought this is just unbelievable. So I then I proceeded to take that information. I now have an address for my birth mother. And I thought, good Lord, what am I going to say to her? But I knew I had to reach out because really, truly, I wanted to offer thanks. Otherwise, I would not be here. My daughters would not be here. My precious legacies would not be here. So I wrote her a note. Hi, I'm Peggy, and I am your biological daughter, and I very much would like to meet to offer gratitude. I don't want money or a kidney. I literally said that because I didn't know how she would and I'm kind of like to the point. I send the note, no response. I do it again, no response. And then my husband, who is my best friend, my love, he's an incredible writer. And he said, Peg, why don't you let me take a stab at writing Anita, who I haven't met yet, who doesn't know this yet. And I was just freaking out because I thought, that is so painful to me to think that I'm circumventing my birth mother to get to her, and how do I know how that's going to affect her? And I felt, okay, I with good intention, I thought it's with good intention, and I don't want to hurt. Joel, he's a beautiful writer, take a stab at it. So 6 paragraphs later, because my letter was like, hi, I think we're sisters, can we talk? He's like, no, you can't do that. So he sends the letter, it was June 30th. We sent it to what we didn't realize, it was a Seattle address. 6 weeks goes by and I thought, oh goodness, I have caused someone pain, which was never my intention. What am I gonna do? So 6 weeks goes by and he and I are driving home one night and voicemail is going through the car, right? I hear this, hi, this is Anita Fineday. I'm like, oh my God. So I said, just keep playing it. I have to drive and focus. She said, well, I'll let you tell that part. So that was in 2015 and I'll let you tell the rest of that. But then on August 20th, 2015, I got to see her for the first time. And I walked into Rustica and we were the only 2 gals in the place, so I knew it had to be her, right? And I remember thinking, I had talked to you on the phone a little bit, but I had said to you, I don't even know how to begin this conversation other than I am so grateful you're in my life. And this is just incredible. I'm going to shut my mouth and let you.
So I'll add a couple of pieces to that story. So Peggy mentioned a pediatrician, obstetrician, who worked in Louisville, Kentucky. Well, first let me tell you about Louisville, Kentucky. So my mom grew up on the White Earth Indian Reservation, which is a 4-hour drive northwest from here. And she went to nursing school and she became an RN. And she said that she wanted to get as far away from the White Earth Indian Reservation as she could, because she said there's nothing there. There's no jobs, there's no opportunity. So she went into the Army, and she was an Army nurse during, during Korea. And so she married my dad, and he was from Louisville, Kentucky. So that's how she ended up in Louisville, Kentucky. And so she was an RN. She worked at a hospital, and she divorced my dad, and then found out after she was divorced from my dad, found out she was pregnant. And she said there was one female gynecologist, obstetrician. There were very few female doctors, and this is 1954, very few female doctors. So she went to this one female doctor that all of the nurses trusted, and everybody referred to her as Dr. Peggy. And so that's who my mom went to for medical care. And when she said that she could not financially, so I'm the oldest, which is kind of unusual. It's usually the oldest child that gets adopted if mom has that child at a very young age or something. So my mom said she was not able to care for 2 children. And so she said Dr. Peggy told her that she had found a nice family who wanted to adopt her child. And so what the pieces that we put together later were that my mom was an RN in the hospital at the time called Norton's, and Peggy's adoptive dad was a doctor in that hospital. And we're fairly certain that their paths must have crossed in that hospital. And we might even have been at the employee picnic with our parents who worked there. But my mom did not know who had adopted her child, and Peggy's parents didn't know who the biological mother was. So we were in very close proximity to each other, but we didn't know who the other one was. So we both left Louisville, Kentucky, and I guess through circuitous routes, both ended up in Minnesota. Okay. You want me to say? I'll say something about when. The other thing I'll say about what I do. So I'm an attorney and I work for tribes, and worked as a chief judge for my tribe for 14 years. But one of my areas of expertise is in the Indian Child Welfare Act, which is about keeping Native kids with their families. So it's really ironic that I had a sister that I didn't know anything about who was adopted by a non-Native family. And if anybody pays attention to the Supreme Court, there was just a Supreme Court oral argument on an Indian Child Welfare Act case Monday. And so, or was it Tuesday? Anyway, and so we were in front of the Supreme Court at 5 a.m. trying to get into the oral argument, and we were not successful. So, so lots of interesting intersections.
You know, when so my parents actually divorced when I was 3, and I acquired an incredible stepfather who has now passed away, but they both were all so supportive when I was beginning this journey. And when I finally told my father, the retired surgeon, I said, you know, Dad, this is the skinny. What did you not tell me? What did you know? And he said, Peggy, honestly, we just wanted a child. I knew Dr. Howard because she was the chief obstetric resident, and I was a resident at the time, and I knew she'd be a conduit to finding us a baby. In fact, I'm named after her. So my name was Peggy Jean Kasdan in honor of her and the service that she helped place me with. And so here we are. And I remember showing my dad photos of my birth mother. He's like, I knew her. She was an incredible nurse. She worked so hard. And he said, I had no idea who the biological mother was. And then I shared with him who the biological father was. And he said, no way, he was my buddy, but I never knew. And so this was a really intimate, tiny community, and the medical community in Louisville, tiny as it is. And it's interesting how these lines never got crossed. People didn't share things like they do. We had no internet. Things were very secretive. And in fact, I'm the result of a one-night stand and a lot of tequila. And I said, okay, well, I'm glad I'm here and I like tequila, so that's good. But just like what you were saying, Anita, about how
It's actually going to be 5 and 3 minutes. If you could just hold off on those comments until after 5, that would be great. It's a PG audience until 5 p.m. and then we switch over to the PG-13 audience.
Kool-Aid and a one-night stand. That's
Sorry, just wanted to interject.
A lot of colorful Kool-Aid, and so it's I honestly have to say that this is an incredible gift. I never anticipated, nor did I expect. And I think what Anita now knows about me is that I just don't stop until I'm finished. I thought I got to go all the way to the end, because what I didn't realize all my life until knowing about her and having her in my life is that it felt confining to be aligned with this story, right? And then all of a sudden, the door is blown open, and it's freeing. And the intent to find her was always with love. Could this be helpful? Could it make her feel free? Will we be okay? How will our families react? And I sort of thought, well, you know what? I think if the intention is set with goodness and kindness and love, then I think nothing can come negative. Come from, oh my God, words are hard today. That nothing bad can come from that. And so here we are. I would love to open up for questions. I'm talking too much.
No, that was great. Lisa, do you have a question right away? Here, I can give you a microphone for the folks that are on Teams. Go ahead.
So what happened when you got the letter? What was your reaction? Yeah, because
at the time I had an office in Seattle that I just visited periodically. So the letter got mailed to Seattle and sat there for a while. And so I was standing in my office reading this letter, and a woman that I work with walked by, and she stopped and she said, "Are you okay?" So I don't know what the expression on my face was, shock. And I said, "Here, read this." And so I had no idea that I had a sister, and I was totally stunned, but I don't know. And the woman that gave the letter to, she said, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "I'm going to call her." So I called within, I don't know, a couple of hours of getting the letter. So I called her. And later on, so we've been to some family events. This is the thing that really bugged me, was I found out later that practically everybody in my family knew about this baby that my mom had given up. My uncle, my aunt and uncle, and my aunt and uncle said that they tried to take this baby, and my mom wouldn't let them. And Peggy would have had a very different life if they live on the Red Lake Indian Reservation, so she would have had a very different life. And but everybody in my family knew, and so my mom told her brother and her sister and her mom, and then they told their kids. So my cousins all knew, and my uncle and my aunt are like the biggest gossips that you have ever encountered, and they never told me. I was shocking to find out. They're like, oh yeah, we knew you had a sister. I'm like, when were you going to tell me? So they were going to take it to their grave, I guess, as was my mom. So I think the very next day I went over and talked to my mom, and I said, guess who I talked to? My sister. And she paused for a minute, and she said, I said, they've contacted you, right, Mom? And you wouldn't respond. And she kind of looked down and said, yeah, they tried to get me to respond. She said, I thought that was, in the past. I didn't think that anyone would ever know. So, and I would say she's still alive. She's 93. So we have good genes on that side. And she has been gracious, I guess. She's been gracious. And we actually did have a dinner. How many years ago was that?
December 2015, right
December
after
20.
I met her.
And so Peggy, we have photos of Peggy with her adoptive mom and her biological mom. So they
And I
came
remember,
together.
right, when I was squeezing your arm, we're meeting at the Radisson Blue at Mall of America. And my mom and stepdad weren't living here at the time. And I said, you need to come up here. This is pivotal. Oh, I've got stuff. I said, stop. Just get up here for 24 hours. I don't care. We all age every day, right, Mom? So she comes up, and you and I were standing in that restaurant. I was squeezing your arm. I thought, what is going to go down? Like, is anything going to go down? I don't know. And so they both, Eleanor, birth mother, and my mother, Loretta, from Chattanooga, Tennessee, my wild Southern Belle mom, they just walk right up to each other. They hugged. And so I'm starting to cry. Of course, my husband's bawling. No surprise there. And my mother said to Eleanor, thank you for giving her to me. And Eleanor said, thank you for doing the work. I don't want her back. And they really just were sort of chummy, and it was really quite beautiful because, again, all of this, we had no idea how the family was going to respond. I thought, how is my own sister Eileen going to respond? How are my children going to respond? And it took me a while to expose them to all of this because I just didn't know, and I was being protective. But at some point, I had to just let go of that rope and say, you know what? When your heart is open and the intentions are great, look what can become. And all the while knowing that this is not all unicorns and fairy dust for everybody. And I went into this with zero expectations. I didn't want to hurt anybody, but I didn't know what would become of this. And I got a treasure. And she's a part of my family, and I'm a part of hers. And we just widened that circle. And the journey absolutely continues.
And the other interesting thing is, so my oldest daughter married into a Jewish family. And so we were just talking about going to my grandson's bar mitzvah in February in New York City. And so we have that, the Jewish side of the family. And so it just kind of all fits together really well.
Yeah, thank you both first and foremost for sharing that. That's awesome. Yeah, give them a round of applause. Thank you. I love hearing it almost sounds like serendipity to me, just the sheer amount of coincidences that happened. And to add one more, my mom is from Minnesota, and my brother lived in Louisville, Kentucky for about 3 years. So we're all connected. It's a small world. Let's open it up to questions. I know there was a couple that were in the Q&A submissions. We can jump into one right away, and then definitely feel free to shoot these virtual folks online. And then I kind of want to get Elise's take on this as well before we jump off. One of the big questions was you had mentioned earlier, Anita, I think, ICWA going to the Supreme Court, and someone asked, "What is your point of view on what's happening there? Is there any more detail you can share around that?"
Oh, I could share a lot of details.
It's after 5 p.m., so go for it.
It's so the Indian Child Welfare Act has been under attack. This is just another in a series of cases that are attacking this law. And I would just say, well, and the oral argument was supposed to be 2 hours. It went 3 hours and 11 minutes, which is kind of unheard of for the Supreme Court to go over by that much. Tribes are under attack. Tribes have always been under attack. And this law, it's not so much about the kids. This law, the argument they're trying to make is that Native Americans or Indians, that's a race, and that this is a race-based law. And so it should be struck down as unconstitutional. That's where they want to go. So they really don't care about the kids. They just want to start striking down legislation that pertains to tribes. And so that's the big picture.
Thank you for sharing that. There was another question that was asked earlier that you actually answered. Somebody had submitted, were you named after Dr. Peggy? Which is just a cool coincidence to see. One of the other ones I wanted to ask you, Peggy, was there a change in how you felt or viewed yourself after finding out you were not only a Jewish American, but also a Native American? Like, that's probably a culture shock, to use the word pretty bluntly. How did that kind of feel for you, and how did that change?
At first I thought, okay, so I wanted to move forward and become more educated, because I felt that what I was taught as a young child and what I learned was clearly, I was ignorant. There's so much I didn't know. And how do I honor what I became and not lose that? How do I learn more of my Native American history and integrate that into my life? How do I honor both? And I was actually quite unsettled by it. So I went to my rabbi, who was boatloads of energy, and I said, Rabbi Olitsky, I don't know how to do this. He said, yes, you do. I said, I feel like I'm shunning one group for another. He said, no, you're honoring who you are. You're honoring every part of you. You're honoring your past. You're welcoming the future. And he said, I'll go to a sweat lodge with you if you want me to. And he's just this wonderful ball of energy. He said, no, it's an honor what you're doing. You're not concealing it, and you're welcoming it, and you're not doing anything to your past. So it was unsettling at first.
Yeah, I can't imagine the first shock, but also just sort of the repercussions afterwards of finding out this whole family that you didn't know existed. That's so cool to hear. Were there any questions from the chat? I don't see any on the Teams chat, at least, but there's none. Okay. Eliza, the question was from Santana, just asking about your experience with it, finding out when you did that you were Native American as well, and kind of your journey or story there.
Elisa loves it.
Of course I do. So kind of bouncing off what my mother said, of the foreign, new, unsettling feeling. And I feel like first, I was so young that I didn't fully understand what it meant. I was 16, 17. I really didn't start to dive in to that meaning until more into my college years. And then also coming out of it, developing that eagerness to know, just like my mom, kind of starting on my own a little bit, but feeling the same unsettling confusion, the same exact questions to myself of, am I silencing one piece of me to honor the other, or vice versa? How am I going to balance those pieces? Are they supposed to be balanced? What if Indigenous people don't see me as Indigenous because I grew up not knowing, I grew up not living that way? Or is either side going to accept me as both? Or are they going to accept me as one or the other? So many questions and more. So in a nutshell, that unsettling feeling of really what's going on? over time and through a lot of conversations. And honestly, I remember being nervous to even call Anita to ask her questions that I also needed to learn more because of things that were not taught in school or just in general that are silenced throughout our history. I was nervous to ask questions for so many reasons. Now I'm proud to say that I do honor both in the ways that it ebbs and flows. Sometimes I feel like I'm flowing between both at the same time, and still figuring it out. I don't feel like our journey for learning about our identities is ever going to stop. It's just going to continue to grow and expand. So, yeah.
Said. Well said. One kind of pivot here, I think, unless anyone wants to talk about anything specific. There was a question, which is a little more of a call to action. So we can either save it until the end or we can chat through it now. Any questions from the audience before I fed? Lisa again. Okay, awesome. Hang on one second.
So I'm just curious if you could talk about how you're reestablishing your connection with your mother's tribe and how you're rebuilding that. What is that process like? It's like visiting another world.
You know what? Somewhat. And I have tried to, when I'm with her, I think that she resurrects normally a lot of things from the past. And I don't think she and I have ever talked about my ability to try to become a member of the tribe, which is what I'm trying to do. But there are some laws that are not, they're just older laws, and the tribes are considering changing a lot of things. But I don't think she's ever mentioned it, other than that you're my sister, and isn't it great to have a sister? But like I said earlier, I'm pretty relentless. So I think that as the appropriate steps arise, I'm going to take those because it is something I would like to be a part of, I guess, for lack of a better term, and get the member card. I don't know how else to, that sounds so mundane. I don't mean to belittle it, but I don't think she's ever talked to me about that. Has she ever talked to you about my connection to the tribe, or that she wants to help? I don't think so.
There's a I don't know, peculiarity in the tribe's constitution about enrollment, and there's a period of time. Well, let me just say the whole blood quantum thing, I know you've probably heard people talk about this, is such a colonized, racist view of looking at people. And then the first thing that people usually say when they find out that you're Native American is, how much blood do you have? And my response is always, how much American blood do you have? Like, right? There's no such thing as American blood. So it's not about blood. The system was created and because they thought that tribes would be gone. No one established this system thinking that we'd still be here in 2022. They established this system so that the blood quantum would decrease over the generations, and then the tribes would just disappear. That was the plan. And I'm sure you've all heard about the boarding schools. That was the other piece of it, was we're going to assimilate all of these Native children. You can't speak your language, you can't wear your clothes, you have to change your name. And so that was, I have a funny story. I have a friend of mine who's from Alaska, and same thing there, boarding schools, and the missionaries came into the village, and they told his dad, my friend Andrew wasn't born yet, but they told his dad, you have to have an English name. You can't have a Yupik name. So he said, okay, and I don't know if they told him or he heard, I'll be Andrew. And they said, no, well, you have to have two names. You can't just have one, you got to have two names. Okay, I'm Andrew. So his name is Andrew. And then his other grandfather, exact same story, and he'd heard the word guy. He'd heard somebody say something about a guy. So he said, okay, my name is Guy. Same thing. You can't have just one name, you got to have two. So his name was Guy. And so my friend Andrew's name is Andrew Guy. And so this whole naming thing, like, they didn't speak English, they didn't know what they were talking about. So they just picked something. So this whole colonized view of what people have to be and who you have to be, and sending kids off to boarding schools. So our mother, our grandmother, they were both spent years, and our mother went to a boarding school in North Dakota at the age of 4. So can you imagine if you have kids, or can you imagine at the age of 4 leaving your family and going by yourself to the next state? And living there for an entire year. So that boarding school experience still resonates in Indian country. And I just say, my mom was a terrible mother. And so that's, people ask, like, well, how could you have a younger sister and not know that your mom was pregnant? Because I was 7, 9. So because I never saw my mom. My mom, I was raised by somebody else. So I remember, it's probably when Peggy was born, my mom showing up, and I didn't recognize her. I didn't know who she was. And they said, that's your mom. Go give your mom a hug. So boarding schools impacted our families. And I want to tell one other story that Peggy and I attended. So my oldest daughter works for the American Museum of Natural History in New York City, and she's a researcher. She's always looking for when museums have to give notices about items that they have that might have religious significance. And she found a notice for that had been posted wherever they post these things. It had long expired, but it was a collection of the belongings of Charlotte Fineday. And Charlotte Fineday is our great-grandmother. So we found out that these items were in the Stearns County, St. Cloud, Minnesota Museum. And so we all trooped to St. Cloud. And after 2 years of back and forth with the museum, they returned all those items to me. I have them on my kitchen table. They haven't been tested yet. Evidently, way back, they treated those kinds of items with arsenic, and that was to keep the mice from eating them. So we don't know if they've been treated with arsenic. So you have to wear plastic gloves, but it's a lot of really amazing things that our great-grandmother made. So we both went and saw all of that together, and Elisa was there. And so we all got to see things that beadwork, quill baskets, things that our great-grandmother had made. It's really amazing.
That's really cool. Thank you for sharing that again. We do have a good question from the Teams chat. We're not rating them, by the way. I just noticed it. Lisa, put your hand down. So we're gonna just shift gears a little bit. Are there any specific issues or historical events that both of you, this question's for both of you, wished had more of a spotlight, or that have been, as Elisa mentioned earlier, that have been silenced? It's a pretty big question.
Do you mean for us personally, or for tribal people in general?
I think it's more of a general.
Like for Native people.
Question. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, so I would just say that there's just so much ignorance about Native American people. And the only thing that really got us, probably the thing that most of you know about tribes, is about casinos, right? That's the thing that got us visibility. I mean, before that, you probably drove across, I don't know, the Shakopee Reservation, the Prairie Island Reservation, the Mille Lacs Reservation if you went up north, and you probably never even noticed. So I think just the lack of information about Native people in general. We have a lieutenant governor who is from our tribe. Peggy Flanagan is a White Earth tribal member, and she's a fabulous advocate. And I would encourage you. There's a kid's book about Peggy Flanagan, and I think it's just called, I don't know, Peggy Flanagan. It's like a young adult book, and there's just a few of them. I think maybe 4 that were published here in Minnesota about Native American people here in Minnesota. So Peggy Flanagan is a great spokesperson, I think, about tribal issues. And she's much loved by our tribe. And so I think just the lack of information that people have. If you went to school here, you took Minnesota history, you know, there might have been a couple of sentences about Ojibwe and Dakota people, or the 2 Native groups that are here in this state. But we're ignored largely.
Got another question. Hang on one second, Jen. No, we want to hear your voice. This is not mine.
I was just, I mean, kind of building onto that. I don't know if this is much of a question or more of a comment, but I'm just curious about your perspective on how Native Americans have been portrayed in the media and in media, not just like in the news, but in movies and things like that. I feel like there's such a, from what I've experienced and seen, there's always such a kind of negative connotation. And I feel like that has very much contributed to that perception that you were just talking about. So I don't know if that's a question. That's maybe a comment.
I would just say, watch Reservation Dogs on Hulu. Reservation Dogs takes place on the Muskogee Creek Reservation in Oklahoma, and it's actually filmed right there. It's an all-Native cast and all Native writers, and it's a big hit in Indian country. I can tell you that. We all love it. And I was in Anchorage just a few weeks ago, and one of the lead characters, we were at, there's a big meeting called the Alaska Federation of Natives, and they had him come as a guest speaker, I guess. I didn't see him, but I saw him in the restaurant, and I was like, do you know who that is over there? And I saw him pull his hat down, like he thought he wouldn't get found out. So we figured we're just going to slowly walk by and take pictures as we're walking by. And finally, he just turned around and waved, like he saw us coming. We were not very sneaky. But Reservation Dogs, it kind of has a lot of profanity in it, but it's about real life on the reservation.
May I add to that?
Yes, please.
I was going to respond to your comment that I think that when we see Native folks in the entertainment industry, they're diminished. They're not given lead roles. They're not, celebrated for who they are. And then you asked the question about things in my past I would have liked to have had a voice raised to. I think there are so many people that were excluded for many reasons: Native, Jewish, LGBTQ plus, everything. And I think what the beautiful thing about our world now, there's a lot of upheaval, but from that, it's a lot of recognition that people need to be recognized for who they are, and really everybody matters.
Cheers to that. Yeah, absolutely. We only have a couple minutes left, so I want to be cognizant of your time. Thank you for sharing with us again. I would agree with that statement. Like, we've come a very long way, so it's not all negative in both the news, the media, and also just in our own communities. It's gotten better. Like, I grew up playing Cowboys and Indians, and like that's gone away. Like, things like that. There is one question that I had saved to the end intentionally, so hopefully we can chat about that quick, and then any final words from both of you we'd appreciate. But it's a pretty broad question, so definitely feel free to either answer or don't answer or say it's a bad question. That's fine too. What can we do to make sure more people know about this topic, and how can we support Native and Indigenous communities?
I mean, I would just say, there's a lot of controversy now about what's being taught in schools, but I would just say, make sure that there's something about Native Americans in the curriculum when they're teaching Minnesota history. Make sure that they talk about tribes. And I think the other thing related directly to Peggy's situation is it's time for that law to be changed that people can't get their original birth certificates. Especially, I don't know, maybe there's a few years where people don't, but after you're an adult and you're trying to find out. And when I was the judge at White Earth, we always had people, it was very sad, we always had people coming to the reservation in the summer. Because you don't want to go to northern Minnesota in the winter, but they would come in the summers trying to figure out who they were related to. And it's very sad. Same situation. They wouldn't give them their birth certificates, and they would say something like, I heard a social worker mention White Earth. I think I might be from White Earth. And that's all they knew. And that's really not going to get you very far. And so we called the Minnesota Department of Human Services, and they're like, oh yeah, we've got file cabinets full of birth certificates of Native Americans that we can't send out. So people should be entitled to know who they are, I think.
Absolutely agree. And I think that how we can be helpful is to ask, how may we support you? How may we help you? Are there resources we can help you find? What kind of support do you need? And somehow raise the awareness that everybody deserves a right to know who they are and from where they came, because it just adds to the beautiful tapestry of life. I've got my family just expanded, and it's all for good. So
it's all good. I think something I wanted to bring back was something you had said, Peggy, that I wanted to pinpoint and kind of end this on is there was a lot of steps you had to take to get to this point, it sounds like, and there's a lot of coincidences that happen, but also just a lot of perseverance. So that's awesome that your story, but I think you kind of nailed this point that we were actually talking about in MMU today, our monthly meetup with the whole agency of assuming good intent. And you sort of went forward with this, not only because you were passionate about it and wanted to be included or feel more whole, but you also wanted to just say, like, I want to learn about this, and I'm assuming good intent for Anita, for my mom. I thought that's really cool that you were able to do that both through perseverance and relentlessness, but also just through good intentions, which is really cool.
And in that same vein, I was petrified. I thought, oh God, if I hurt someone and I didn't mean to, I somehow found a way to reconcile that, okay, I don't mean to, and it might happen, and I will have to explain and own up, which I would honorably do. But you're right, it was, I kept going to the very end, and the journey continues.
Yeah, I was gonna say a good ending to this story, but there's really no ending here. It's kind of just expanding. It's the Marvel Cinematic Universe right here. It's great. Anywho, Peggy and Anita, thank you both for being here, and thank you, Eliza, for joining virtually. Give them a huge round of applause.
I love you.
They'll be signing autographs over by the
bakery.
bakery, the baked goods over here. You guys are doing the autograph and meet and greet afterwards, right?
Okay, sure.
That was in the contract, so I just wanted to make sure you were still okay.
Thank
Awesome.
you so very much for all your time and your energy and your effort. I really appreciate it. And it's humbling. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been an honor and a pleasure to have you. One last round for these two panelists. Thank you both.
Love you, Mom. Love you, Anita.